Are good to go on YouTube. Facebook should be up momentarily. And there we go. Good to go there. Welcome in. It is another Tuesday night. I know it was off last week, but I'm back this week talking Georgia football. A lot of stuff going on. We are a little more than 2 weeks out from the start of the season. I know we saw some FBS games this past weekend. We've got our first Power 5 games this coming weekend. Georgia is still practicing for September 26th against Arkansas. There, obviously, we're still sort of dealing with and sorting through the Jamie Newman news. You have Georgia earning a commitment today from Jackson Meeks, a wide receiver out of the state of Alabama who isn't the highest rated prospect, but there's some reason to believe that he's going to have a monster senior season and really climb in those rankings. And some news today, Tre McKitty going to be out a couple of weeks. He's questionable to doubtful now for the opener as Georgia sort of loses another big piece or theoretical big piece for offense. And Tre McKitty, I know he's someone that I'm personally been very interested in. We'll lead off with that tonight. Give some more time for people to come in. Frank DiCarlo, Keith Finney, Stephen Card, good to see you guys. Colby Curry mentions Darnell Washington. Next guy up. I have not been sort of shy on my expectations for Washington and what he might do and why him maybe more so than some of the other five-star prospects that Georgia brought in this last class to sort of slow down on him specifically. But if McKitty's not ready to go, then that's just more pressure on him to step up and be ready to go early. And I think that's one of the big things you now look for with him not out there. Jacob O'Neal, good to see you. Nelson Buckland, good to see you as well. Yeah, Southern Miss had a coaching change after its first game of the season, and there are a couple of guys on Georgia staff who have some ties and were mentioned with that job. Matt Luke, being from the state of Mississippi, head coaching experience at Ole Miss, and then Todd Monken, who actually was the head coach at Ole Miss before Jay Hopson got fired. I don't expect them right now certainly to even be thinking about that job. They've got clearly their own jobs to worry about, but each of the last 2 years, Georgia has seen an assistant coach get hired to go elsewhere. And if things go well this season, there's no reason to expect why that might not be the case. So we'll give everyone a little bit more time before really digging in and diving in here. But I hope you all are having a great Tuesday night. As hard as it is to believe, we're getting closer and closer every week with the start of the football season. Georgia is just, I believe, 2 more Saturdays away from its first football game. I know a lot of us, myself included, didn't necessarily think we'd get here, but looks like we're going to have a football season, and that excites me a lot because we have legitimate stuff to talk about every week now on Tuesday nights. So with that, we shall begin. So the big news of today is sort of the Tre McKitty news. Kirby Smart spoke about him on Saturday, said he had gotten dinged up a little bit. And he said on Saturday he liked what he's seen so far out of him, but he was a little dinged up, had a knee injury. Comes out today that he had to get a minor scope on that knee and is going to be out a few weeks and is now questionable to doubtful, I believe was the wording there, with regards for his status for the opener against Arkansas. For the Georgia offense, it's just, unfortunately, it's par for the course in this August and September where you see Dominic Blaylock go down. You see Jamie Newman opt out for this coming season. And now Tre McKitty, a guy who I personally had thought was going to be a significant piece of this offense, especially after the Blaylock injury. He's a guy who's played at a Power 5 level, put up modest numbers before, and I think there's a real chance with this new system and with Monken, there's a good chance of him potentially breaking out a little bit, sort of doing what I think we saw Lawrence Cager do a season ago and McKitty specifically have more production than I think either Charlie Warner or Eli Wolf did for the Bulldogs last year. So for him to now be injured, and granted, most of the hay is in the barn, so to speak, with this fall camp. Georgia's conducted their 2 scrimmages. They won't hold another one. So it is good that he's sort of been through those high-intensity reps. But in terms of fine-tuning and game planning for that first Arkansas game, which is where things are really going to start to shift over these next couple of weeks, it's a tough blow. And hold on, I want to get Brett Oglesby brings up, we need McKitty by the Auburn game. I think that's absolutely correct. You need, with Georgia playing Auburn in that second week, you absolutely need your best guys, your best horses to be available for there. Now, granted, Georgia should blow out Arkansas. That game should not be close. Whether or not it looks like a 24-0 game, we saw a lot, it seems like a season ago from Georgia, or it's actually you do see some offensive fireworks there. It doesn't matter. Georgia should not, and I believe will not lose that game. But that Auburn game is a tougher opponent, and you need a guy like McKitty there because you're really who this guy really affects, and we'll go into Darnell Washington a little bit more later. But the guy this just keeps more stuff onto is George Pickens because you're already without Blaylock. I think Karis Jackson, Demetrius Robertson are question marks at best when talking about them and what they might be able to bring to the Georgia offense. You have a lot of young freshman receivers, but they're not going to be ready to go game one or game two. You even look last year at Pickens and Blaylock. Those guys did not produce a whole lot of numbers early on in their time in Georgia. So for that Auburn game, in the Arkansas game as well, a lot is going to be asked of George Pickens now, and it's worth keeping in mind he is only a sophomore. And he is really going to have to show that he, sort of like he did in the Sugar Bowl, which was an encouraging sign, that he can just be the absolute guy and the guy who, if Georgia wanted to, could throw it to him 25 times in a game and come down with it 20 times and do enough to move the ball. As far as tight end specifically, and the fortunate thing here is that it doesn't sound like a long-term injury for McKitty, which means Georgia will get him back at some point, almost certainly before that big October 17th contest against Alabama. I wonder how much more Darnell Washington is used right now. Kirby Smart mentioned he came in at around 273 pounds. That's just way too big, even for a guy of his size that's basically pushing offensive lineman territory. So as he gets in better shape, and again, he had off-season knee surgery as well to sort of clean up some of the things that he had as a high school injury, I'll be interested to see how Georgia uses him because I don't think he would have been necessarily the every down tight end threat that I think we were going to, and I still think we'll see McKitty ultimately be. But in certain situations, in short yardage situations, and in sort of those red zone packages, Washington is absolutely a guy that Georgia can get on the field and find ways to mismatch. I know about his blocking, but he's so big and such a nimble athlete. When I saw him at the Under Armour All-American game, he was moving dudes around like Patrick Swayze in Roadhouse, just getting them out of the club. And that, I think, is very encouraging, especially for the potential to see him play early on in his time as Georgia, because we know how important blocking is from the perimeter to getting on the field early. And as far as a pass catcher, he's, in my estimation, he wasn't quite as good as Arik Gilbert was, but Arik Gilbert might have been the best high school player in the country last year. But he's still so big, and he's still got the athleticism, the hops, the hands to where he can be a real problem in certain short yardage and in certain goal line situations. And so I do wonder sort of where and how much Georgia integrates him into the offense, especially early on, and now even more so now that Georgia's not going to have Tre McKitty there. Another guy to sort of keep your name out there for is Rylan Godey. He's got a little bit more experience, but seemingly like everyone else in that tight end room, he's got some injury issues there to worry about as well. So it'll be interesting there to sort of see what this tight end situation, which I think is already sort of interesting with how Monken might go about using it, how it changes now that McKitty isn't 100%. Jerry Dogs fans does bring up something interesting. He asks, can the running backs carry the team early? He says yes. I'm very, very bullish right now based off what we have heard and what we know from sort of these two scrimmages, and I believe it was a question asked earlier. I forgot who asked it. Georgia's running backs are the strength of their offense right now. Zamir White has had a fantastic camp. He has looked every bit of the lead running back that you would want him to be. And another guy who's been, I think, a pretty clear winner in all this is James Cook, a guy who has gotten so much hype because of his skill set and his brother and sort of the name brand recognition there. He has really, from my understanding, really delivered and played really well and practiced really well in this Todd Monken offense. I think the thing with Georgia is, one, how much are Cook and White involved in the passing game? I think last year, and I've mentioned this before, you look at the success that LSU had. Yes, Joe Burrow was amazing, and he opened up a lot of things for them. But Clyde Edwards-Helaire being the pass-catching running back that he was, him becoming a real dual-threat sort of running back in a way that hasn't been seen in the SEC in a while, over 1,000 yards, 50 receptions. I believe that had not been done in the SEC at that point. for him to emerge like that opened up a lot of things for this Georgia offense, for the LSU offense a year ago. And I think the combination of Cook again. So as disappointing as the McKitty and Newman news has been, and the Blaylock news on top of that as well, all indications are that this Georgia running back room is shaping up to be very good and very strong, and ultimately a focal point of the team. Now, the flip side of that is a lot of questions that exist about Georgia and their offense is, well, how does the passing game get better? Because the running game hasn't necessarily been an issue. If Zamir White takes a step forward, if James Cook is able to be a true dual threat runner and passer, I think that ultimately is going to start opening things up, especially in the middle of the field where Georgia can start to attack there a little bit more, because you're going to have those linebackers and safeties pulled up trying to keep an eye on those running backs, and that's going to put those corners on the outside in one-on-one situations there. Guys like out of the slot, like, say, Jermaine Burton or, say, a Kieris Jackson, those are the guys that stand to benefit a whole lot if James Cook and Zamir White emerge as pass catchers. So I think that's sort of one thing to look forward to there. Chad Buchanan does ask about another running back, Kendall Milton. It's worth pointing out that this weekend he was in the scrimmage in a black non-contact uniform. I don't believe it's a serious long-term injury. I just believe they're trying to manage him and manage his health right now, given any Georgia fan that was following the program in 2013 saw how quickly running back depth can be tested when that season you had no Keith Marshall. Todd Gurley missed a period of time, and in key games against Missouri, Georgia had to turn to Brandon Douglas and J.J. Green, guys who were nice players, but ultimately were not those elite caliber SEC running backs that Georgia always seems to have, and the guys you need to, I believe, win and have a lot of success in this conference. So that's sort of where we are with the running backs, tight ends, offense situation. This will sort of be what we call the Jamie Newman quarterback dilemma. Last Wednesday, he announces that he's opting out for the season. There's been a lot of speculation as to why that might be. Draft stock status. Was he going to hold on to the starting job? Just everything that you can imagine has been thrown out there. Personally, I think a couple things worth keeping in mind here. If Jamie Newman thought that he was going to come in and just be straight up handed the quarterback job, then he just, I guess, didn't do his homework or didn't sort of know how Kirby has done in the past. Kirby, he is going to keep adding talent where he can add it, and he's not going to settle anywhere. Ultimately, that's, I think, a big reason why Justin Fields isn't at Georgia anymore, and it's, I think, does play a big reason in why Newman is no longer here as well. But the flip side of that is, I think it's safe to say now that Kirby Smart going forward, not just this season, but in 2020, 21, and years forward, Kirby just needs to do a job of, and maybe even taking less hands off, of managing the quarterback situation. I think this Newman situation with him opting out, with them bringing in Daniels, the confusion, and confusion might not be the right word, but the lack of clarity, I think it has hurt the Georgia program to an extent that you look at 2018, a big part early in that season was, well, how do you integrate Fields and how does he work and fit with the offense? And ultimately, I do believe that affected Jake Fromm early on in that season. I think that played a part in why Jake had a pretty terrible game against LSU that year. And that Justin Fields cloud, and I understand Fields feeling the way that he does, but that Fields cloud hung over the team last year, and then I think bled into 2019 as well. You look at 2017 with Jacob Eason. If Kirby felt so strongly about why Jake Fromm was the guy and started him throughout the season, why did Jacob Eason start the opener then? If that's the case, I wonder where Kirby pretty clearly going forward has to get more and has to get better out of his quarterback play. Yes, there are concerns about the rest of the offense, but at the end of the day, quarterback is going to be the bugaboo, the Waterloo, the whatever analogy you want to use, that Kirby Smart sort of has to figure out a way to get over. For Ed Orgeron and LSU, that thing was just finding a way to beat Alabama. If Kirby's able to figure out and get consistent quarterback play and get consistently good quarterback play, whether it be JT Daniels this year, Brock Vandagriff in the future, Carson Beck, Dwan Mathis, whoever that might be, I just think Georgia needs to do a better job, and maybe even it means just taking hands off and just going with a guy and saying, you are a guy. I think you look at what Lincoln Riley has done at Oklahoma. He had a clear succession plan in, okay, I'm going to bring in Baker Mayfield. He's going to be my quarterback for 2 years. I have Kyler Murray coming in behind him. I'm going to have him be my quarterback for a year. I've got this 5-star freshman in Spencer Rattler, but he's not arriving right away. Let me go out and bring in Jalen Hurts for a year, allow me to season Spencer Rattler. And now I have Rattler for 2 full seasons as the starter, as the guy. I think that's the sort of model you look at. Obviously, you can't manage, you can't just say, oh, this guy is going to be our 4-year starter, because you just can't predict that far in advance. But I think the thing you want to see is just more consistency and more of a clear plan and understanding when it comes to that quarterback situation, because ultimately that's sort of the reason why Georgia is where it is right now, and why there are questions and why there are critics of the way Kirby Smart has done things, when in reality, I believe right now, outside of the quarterback position, everything else Kirby Smart has done as a head coach has been exactly what you would want from the guy leading your program. He has recruited at a high level. He's built a great defense. He has shown that he can develop assistant coaches. He has shown that he can improve school. He can show sort of all the things that you want to see from a coach and from a program builder. It's the 90-10 analogy. 90% of what he does is fantastic, and he is incredible at it and arguably one of the best in the country. But that 10% that he doesn't do well is just so glaring that it does lead to more questions than probably deserve to be asked of Smart. And ultimately, that's not fair to him. But when the bugaboo or the issue comes at the biggest and most important position in the sport, it just becomes hard to sort of ignore that. And going forward, this is going to be a question that nags Kirby until it is figured out, until it is correctly answered. More so than even when is Kirby going to beat Saban? When is he going to beat Alabama? Because the reality is Georgia's not guaranteed to play Alabama every year. Saban's not going to be around forever. So long as Kirby Smart is a head coach, so long as football is played the way that it is played, Georgia's still going to have a quarterback. They have a quarterback every year, and nailing whoever that guy is the most important thing. And to even go back and look at and talk about succession plans and sort of having a plan or knowing what you're doing at the quarterback position. Look at the end of the Mark Richt era. So they have Aaron Murray, who's great for the program, does a lot. Winningest quarterback, statistically the best quarterback to ever play for the SEC. After that, you had a 1-year gap with Hudson Mason, a fine guy, but was never going to wow anyone. But in reality, he was getting the seat warm and allowing more opportunity for Bryce Ramsey to get seasoned. Well, Ramsey ends up never being the guy that everyone thought he was going to be. And at the same point in time, Georgia ends up missing out on Deshaun Watson because of that belief in Ramsey. So that 2015 season, they're starting a combination of Grayson Lambert and Fatan Bauta. And the quarterback issues in 2015 with Mark Richt and that Georgia team are a big reason why Mark Richt was no longer the head coach at Georgia. I'm not saying right now that the quarterback situation at Georgia is going to the quarterback issue, the quarterback dilemma, even this Newman thing, it's another, even though it is a separate thing from the Fields and Fromm debate, it is another page in that same chapter. And that is something I think that we have to keep in mind going forward, because at a certain point, Kirby just turns into a national punching bag when it comes to his quarterback decision and quarterback dilemma. So I think JT Daniels is going to be your starter this year. There's a lot riding on him. There's a lot of pressure on him right now. And granted, he had a lot of pressure at USC. He is used to this. When Todd Monken said one of the things he looks for in a quarterback is mental toughness, and that was the number 2 thing he was looking for. I think that was a clear signal of how much he liked JT Daniels, because he's a guy who played in a big-time program like USC, had huge expectations as a 5-star. He knows what it is like to have a metaphorical target on your back and to play with that. And that won't be any different from here at Georgia. But he's going to have to play well to sort of validate everything that has happened in these past couple. Jamie Newman, for whatever reason, did either not think that he could win the job outright, or because he just wanted to go ahead and protect himself from the draft. So we're at the 20-minute mark now. We'll take a couple questions. I know Georgia got a commitment today from Jackson Meeks. Do I have bad internet? That's not surprising. Hopefully it's up it. So one thing that I want to touch on as well today, Georgia landed a commitment from wide receiver Jackson Meeks. He's a 3-star prospect out of Phoenix City. I believe he's the 1622 ranked overall prospect, but he's a lot better player than that. The reason for that rank, he is year, and you factor in with COVID this year, he wasn't out of camp show off his game and show off what he can do. But the state of Alabama, they've started playing high school football. He plays for a big-time program down there in Phoenix City. Forget the name of the high school, but it's the same one that has produced wide receivers Justin Ross, who had a monster freshman year and sophomore year at Clemson, and then E.J. Williams, who Clemson landed this past cycle. So they have shown that they are able to develop and put out really good wide receivers. It's also worth noting that his current head coach is Patrick Nix, the father of Auburn quarterback Bo Nix. So you have that, and he's a guy that has come out and played really well so far to start his high school season. He, I believe, had over 200 yards in a game against Hoover High School, one of the best programs in the country, well known. And then he followed that up with a 9-catch, 130-yard, multiple touchdown performance in his second game. So you have that out there, and you have all that. I can't wait asking about the Monkey and Luke stuff. We can get to that. I touched on that a little bit earlier at the top. But speaking on Jackson Meeks, wide receiver, when Georgia brought in 5 guys a season ago, when it brings in guys like Marcus Roseme, Jermaine Burton, Arian Smith, Justin Robinson, Georgia was just never going to appeal to those super high central Phoenix City. Georgia was never going to get those 5-star guys in this class because they want to see how those guys ahead of them play. And if those guys ahead of them play well, that means the guys behind them aren't going to play right away as freshmen. So in this class, you're looking at probably some guys who need some more time to develop a little bit. That's why I think a guy like Meeks is such a nice and an interesting add because, yes, he is a little bit undervalued because of the ACL injury and the time he missed. But as he gets further away from that, and if he's able to put up a huge season this year in high school, I think that's going to mean a whole lot for what Georgia is able to do. And ultimately, like we've seen with Nick Chubb, farther you get that ACL injury, and I know Chubb didn't specifically have an ACL injury, but he had a pretty devastating knee injury. The farther and farther away you get from that, the more confident you get, and the just sort of more you return to looking like the player you used to be. So by the time he's asked to contribute at Georgia, he'll be 2, 3, 4 possibly years away from that knee injury. So I think it's a really nice ad. I know on paper it doesn't look like the greatest recruiting win in the world, but I think that's something really good that sort of we came out of with Georgia today. And as far as recruiting and what's left, I think Georgia's class is now at 16. I know Georgia's class now is at 16 commitments. It's big game hunting the rest of the way. Terrion Arnold, the safety. Xavier Sorey, the linebacker. Shmuel Munden, the linebacker. Marius Mims, 5-star offensive tackle. Corey Foreman, 5-star defensive end. Mason Smith, 5-star defensive tackle. Georgia is big game hunting the rest of the year from recruiting. Their class sort of is what it is right now. And if they are able to land, I'm not saying they're going to land all 6 of the guys I just listed, but if they land their fair share of those, Georgia is going to finish with a top 3, top 4 class once again and salvage what ended up being a very strange recruiting year. But still, I think Georgia has a chance to sign a very elite class full of guys that have potential to make a real impact at the next level. Yeah, Jermaine Dunbar bringing up that he has over 400 yards in 2 games already. He is a guy places a lot of emphasis on senior year tape and how guys play their senior year. Whereas you look at some schools like Clemson or Ohio State, yes, they get a lot of their work done early, but one of the things that they sacrifice there is they have their classes mostly filled up and ready to go before the start of these kids play their senior seasons. And it's taking away an extra evaluation. It's taking away a chance to learn and see, oh, wow, this guy who's got good measurables is just blowing up and becoming a better football player right now. And that might make him a more attractive recruit on the back end. You look at a guy like Eric Stokes. The beginning of his senior year, he was not a guy that had earned a Georgia offer. By the end of the year, he got better as a football player. He had the measurables necessary to come in, and he has turned into one of the best cornerbacks in the country. And it's because he just played more. And when you play more football, you just naturally get better at it. And so that's, I think, a big reason why you see Kirby sort of take the recruiting philosophy that he does. We'll go into questions now. We're about the 25-minute mark. Gamer Boy on YouTube asks, hey, Connor, what are DeJuan's chances of starting against Arkansas? Has he been officially cleared for contact? So I will answer the second question first. Yes. Unlike JT Daniels right now, DeJuan Mathis is cleared and ready to go. He can play. He is practicing full contact, everything in there. As far as starting, My understanding is that he didn't have a great scrimmage this past weekend when the intensity on him was turned up a little bit, and he was taking more reps with the ones because Jamie Newman was not out there. So I do think there's a good chance we see him play and perhaps even meaningful minutes against Arkansas. But right now in my book, JT Daniels, assuming he ends up getting cleared to physically play in the games, which I believe will happen, JT Daniels is going to end up being your starting quarterback. Let's see. Questions, comments. Let's see. Okay, yeah, we will address Southern Miss right now. Southern Miss moved on from their head coach, Jay Hobson, yesterday. And with that, the job came open, and naturally you have your coaching rumors. These are the candidates who might fit in here, who might work well here. And two Georgia names came up. The first is Matt Luke. He is Georgia's offensive line coach. He is from the state of Mississippi, from Gulfport. He is a former head coach at Ole Miss. He knows that state well. I think there are a lot of people who did not necessarily believe that he deserved to get fired from Ole Miss in the manner that he did. I am among them. And he is a guy who I believe ultimately will be a head coach again. Whether or not that's at the SEC level, it's to be seen. But I think Southern Miss makes sense for a guy like Luke, and that's why you saw his name thrown out there. The other name that got thrown out there was Todd Monken, but this name I believe a little bit less, because Monken is a guy who was already the head coach at Southern Miss from 2013 to 2015. 2015, he wins 9 games. Looks like that program's on the upswing. And he leaves to be the offensive coordinator for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He tried, I think, for the last couple of years to try and be an NFL offensive coordinator in the hopes of becoming an NFL head coach. This year, after getting fired with the Cleveland Browns last year, he's back at the college level. In 2012, he went from Oklahoma State offensive coordinator to Southern Miss head coach. Personally speaking, this is no inside information, but if I'm a guy who's looking to move up in the world, to start in one place 5 years ago and to sort of leave it, not the greatest terms. He left right before signing day there at Southern Miss. To leave on not the greatest terms, to try and socially advance yourself, only for 5 years later for you to end back in the exact same spot, that just doesn't seem like something that I personally want to do, and I don't believe Todd Monken does that either. So while Monken's name is rightfully so going to be attached to that Southern Miss job, it doesn't make a lot of sense for me for him to come back to the college game, take a high-profile gig like the Georgia offensive coordinator job, and ultimately try and leave and go to a group of 5 school in Conference USA. I think you look at a guy like Mel Tucker, who was an offensive coordinator. He goes and takes the Colorado job. You look at a guy like Dan Lanning, I think he's going to be a guy who gets mentioned for Power 5 jobs. With the way Georgia is and their levels and heights right now, this is a program where if you're a coordinator here and you do well, there's a good chance that you can go and take what you've learned here and turn that into a Power 5 job. And I think that's the sort of thing you're going to continue to see there. Samuel Hazeltine, opening day is September 26th for Georgia. A couple of ACC and Big 12 teams are playing this weekend, sort of getting the Power 5 started up for the first time. But all SEC teams begin the season September 26th. Let's see. Scrolling down. Facebook questions, comments. We're about the 30-minute mark. Bobby Leathers says, I don't think that Georgia will be any good. I have never said anything but that. I think the defense is going to be very, very good and very strong this year, perhaps the best in the country. I still think this is a team that, even with the major question marks on offense, is capable, very capable, in my opinion, of at least winning 8 games. Do they go 10-0? I don't know. I feel less confident about the Alabama game now. But I still think this team matches up pretty well with Florida, and you win that game, you go 9-1. The ceiling is admittedly a little bit lower without Jamie Newman this season. You can't hype up and say all these nice things about Newman all throughout the offseason, and then when he leaves and opts out, you can't suddenly turn around and say, oh, everything's going to be just fine. So, the ceiling admittedly is a little bit lower, but that doesn't mean I think Georgia's going to go 4-6 or anything like that. I still think they're going to be better than LSU. LSU was taken and sustained, even since fall practices started again, more significant losses than Georgia has. So having that in there, while sure, I'm reacting honestly to the Jamie Newman news, that doesn't mean I think Georgia's not going to be any good this season. Joe Prescott asks, anywhere on the kicker position. As far as I know, it is going to be Jared Zirkle out there to start. Jake Camarda has mentioned that he'd like to potentially try being kicker, but from all indications, he has not won that job, and that means that Jared Zirkle is going to be your kicker. He's got a big leg. Kickoffs will not be the issue for Zirkle, I think. It'll be obviously those field goals. He's never kicked in a stadium of Georgia's size before, and while, yes, it's not a full stadium this year, the optics are going to be a little bit different, and the pressure on him is going to be something he has never dealt with in his life. And we know with kickers, how they deal with that is just as important as how strong and how accurate their leg is. So with Zirkle, with a freshman kicker you're trotting out there for the first time, you don't know what he's going to do until you put him out there. So it'll be interesting to see sort of how that goes. Christopher Walton, the Georgia offense has to show a growth on offense. They have to just show that they're better. They have to show that last year was an aberration of sorts and things bounce back a little bit. Otherwise, the recruiting questions, especially on the offensive side of the ball, are only going to continue, and it's going to become harder, I think, to recruit elite wide receivers, elite quarterbacks, elite running backs, really. And yes, obviously, Georgia has continued to do that at a high level, but if the offense continues to struggle, at a certain point, this just might turn into a Les Miles LSU situation. So that is, I think, one thing to be worried about there. Green Soldier, Tre McKitty, no, he's not too banged up. He might miss the Arkansas game. He might not be 100% for the Auburn game, but it's not a long-term injury. It might slow his start to the season, but he is expected – it's only expected to be about a 3-4 week injury. So worst case scenario, he maybe misses the Arkansas game and isn't 100% ready for Auburn, but he probably plays, I would say, in the Auburn game. And depending how that knee heals and how he reacts, he still might be able to go out there and put on a show against Arkansas. Kylan Richter, good to see you from Moultrie, Georgia, down there in South Georgia. Rodney Baxter brings up a fair point of the hype around Daniels or the hype around Newman and why maybe things shouldn't change all that much with the Georgia offense this year. Given Jamie Newman had not taken a real game snap in a Georgia uniform, and with that, everything that had come with Newman had just been a projection, a potential of what this offense could be. And this offense still under JT Daniels, it could end up being very good. I think one thing that while Kirby Smart will never come out and say how great the offense truly is in press conference. If Georgia's offense was somehow operating like LSU's offense was a season ago and they were just scoring out well on the defense, Kirby Smart still wouldn't say anything positive about them. So with that in mind, it's also worth mentioning Georgia's defense is loaded, first team and second team. So this offense never really gets a break. It doesn't really get a chance in these practices and these scrimmages to just feast on cupcakes like maybe some of these other teams do, maybe like a less deep team like, say, Florida does in their practices. And so that depth will sort of, I think, potentially help when it's playing against competition because as good as I think Auburn, Tennessee, Kentucky potentially are, their defenses might just not be as good as Georgia's second-string defense. And ultimately that could end up helping, I think, make the Georgia offense a little bit better. Joel Moody asked, do I think the lack of experience on offense will hurt Georgia early on? I think all offenses in general will probably struggle a little bit this year, just given the weird offseason schedule, given the weird practice schedules. Offenses tend to be a little bit behind defenses in general early on in the year. I think that Alabama game will be the first time that I really judge, okay, where is this offense? Because by that point, you'll have played 4 full games. You'll have been able to see who stood out so far. So having that out there, I don't expect this Georgia offense to look like LSU did at the end of last season. And it's worth keeping in mind, as good as LSU's offense was a season ago, it really didn't hit another gear until later on in the season. I know they scored 45 against Texas, but it really not till the end of the year where they were putting 37 on Georgia, 70 on Oklahoma, 42 on Clemson. Teams, and you've seen this with Georgia in the past too, Georgia gets better and plays its best football in the month of November. I would expect that to once again be the case, in part because of the schedule, because the schedule this year for Georgia is front-loaded, whereas those last 4 opponents, Georgia should win all those games by double digits. So with that out there, it might be a little sluggish early, and that just comes with the turnover and all the newness on there. But is it detrimental? I don't think so. I still expect Georgia to be undefeated going into that October 17th contest against Alabama. So we're at the 35-minute mark. Let's do our last one good question. This is not a good question. It's a good question. It does not qualify as a one good question. Bobby Leathers asks, who wins NFL game on Thursday night, Kansas City or Houston? I'll go with Mahomes. And that guy is just so unbelievably good. And I have real questions about Houston after they trade away DeAndre Hopkins and how that team is going to look this year. Mahomes is excellent. Andy Reid with time to prepare. I really like Kansas City in that game. I didn't predict 2 losses. I said they could go 8-2, but I'm still on record as saying going through the regular season, Georgia will be 9-1 and SEC East champs and playing in the SEC championship game. I have never wavered from that. I could see 2 losses. I could see multiple losses now, whereas with Newman before, I was probably a little bit higher on what Georgia could do. But I still think Georgia is going to be a very good team this season. Let's see. One last question. Give me one good one. Do we play week 1? Bobby Leathers, there is the one good question because admittedly, throughout the offseason, I was skeptical that we would get to this point. I was skeptical about our abilities to – I was skeptical as a country, as a state, as college football campuses to get to this point. But we are 2 weeks out, and in the ACC and in the Big 12, they're playing this weekend. Yes, there's going to be some moving around of some games you've seen already. NC State and Virginia Tech have moved their week 1 game back a little bit. But there will be college football this season, and ultimately I think that's a very good thing. I'm glad that we were able to push through it and get to it. And it's not an easy decision it was certainly not an easy decision to make some of the decisions that had to be made, both in the canceling of non-conference games, but in the decision to push through and have a season, especially after the Big 10 and the Pac-12 made the decisions that they made. As hard as it is to believe, a month ago from today, 4 weeks, the Big 10 and Pac-12 had announced their seasons were done. That was a month ago. And Georgia and the SEC, while there have been a couple speed bumps here and there, it hasn't fallen off the wagon yet. It's still chugging along. There's still going to be a season. And the thing that I have been saying is if we can get to September 26th, then I think there will be a season. And I feel more confident with each growing day that we are going to get to September 26th. So I think that's a good spot to end it tonight. Tomorrow night with Jeff, you have Before the Hedges. One thing, Jeff and I will be on hand on Friday night in Rayburn County to see Brock Vandergrift take on Gunnar Stockton. I know a lot of people are looking forward to that. We'll have some great video coming out of that. I think it should be pretty fun and exciting. Thursday, we have Cover 4. As you guys know, there's always a ton to talk about, which that will likely be something that's usually a fun show to do with myself, Mike Griffith, Jeff Sintel, and Brandon Adams. Obviously, you have Dog Nation Daily every Monday through Friday. You have Friday Night Mics along with On the Beat on Monday. So Dog Nation has you covered in the run-up to the season. We're only – this offseason, as long and as strange and as weird as it has been, we only have 2 more Saturdays without college football in the state of Georgia, and I think that's a very good thing for the state and for this program. And hopefully, 3 weeks from now, we'll be talking about how great JT Daniels looked in that first game against Arkansas. So have a great Tuesday night. It's great talking to you guys. We'll see you around.